Hello, team, and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. This is the second part of my news piece for the 22nd of August 2023. I'm actually cutting off the frontline update because my whole second piece went on for like 40 minutes because, you know me, I like to talk. So I'm just going to do my frontline update will be a separate video, and it will be just the segment that I did on the frontline. Anyway, here's the rest of the news and military aid and the geopolitical topics. Let's go to military aid. So, 70 Ukrainian military men, that's pilots and ground staff, will undergo F16 training in Denmark. They are the first wave, followed by the second and third, Air Force spokesman Yuri Ignat has said. The other group are young pilots, actually yesterday's graduates, and we heard about this yesterday, who will go to Great Britain, where they will undergo a longer program, starting with basic English training and knowledge of Western light engine equipment, and transition to fighter aircraft. This program will last longer, possibly up to 2 years, but this is a perspective that awaits us. So they are putting things in place, immediate training and longer term things. So you'll get this continual process of getting pilots through and trained up to be able to fly F-16s and possibly other NATO jets as well. Pentagon has said the US, and this is significant, is ready to train Ukrainian pilots on F-16s if Europe lacks the capacity. The US is willing to train Ukrainian pilots on F-16 jets if European partners do not have enough capacity to train as many as Kyiv wants, says the Pentagon spokesperson. This is a bit of a change of rhetoric from the White House there. Quote, Ukraine has made a request to the US regarding JSSM cruise missiles for F-16s, which can help liberate Crimea. So the fact is that Storm Shadows and Scout missiles, which have already been transferred to Ukraine, are incompatible with the F-16, but JASSM can be used. So those aren't incompatible. And obviously they need, if you get F-16s are only really about the weapons they can fire. I mean, that's why F-16s, everyone's talking about them and everyone wants them as opposed to MiG-29s. It's about the radar they have and it's about the weapons they can fire and the advantages that they give to the Ukrainians over what the Russians have. So it's going to be super important as to what weaponry the US particularly allows these F-16s and provides these F-16s to use along with allies. We'll keep a close eye on that. Now, talking about the US, and the US is without the US, Ukraine would be screwed, right? We all know this. I am torn with the US because there seems to be this, yeah, we're helping them as much as we can and they get whatever they ask for. Yes, but it takes an awful long time sometimes to get certain pieces of this equipment. So, it took longer than it should have done to get M777 howitzers, HIMARS, tanks, and now F-16, so on and so forth. Don't shoot the messenger here. I'm going to slag off both Biden and Trump, but it's not me. It's this source, David D. So David D says, to anyone thinking the US is not slow walking aid to Ukraine, Biden didn't use all the money last year. $2+ billion was returned. So it's not something I know. Might need to look into that. Stated 12 F-16s will cost $1.5 billion. A lie. Blocked the transfer of F-16s from other countries for a year. Hundreds of up-armored Humvees are still being scrapped. 0 tanks have been delivered to Ukraine so far, still being held in Germany. 1,000+ M1117s that were pledged last year are still on hold. 400+ Avengers, those are Humvees with manpads, stingers on top, in storage in Pennsylvania are about to be scrapped. 400+ M198 155mm cannons are rusting in CA. In California, 3 million rounds of cluster munitions we can't use, but they can in storage, only a few cent. M26 rockets we can no longer use, but they can, sitting in storage. M57 rockets about to be scrapped, being replaced, are in storage. None of the transfers would cost anything but transfer fees that Europe would gladly pay for. In most issues, sending stuff to Ukraine would save the US disposal fees that are expensive. So basically, with almost all of this stuff here, the US are getting rid of, and this is why I'm going to do a whole video on cost implications and to try and enlighten certain, particularly American critics. And there are many Americans that are totally up for this and on board and whatever, but there are some Americans who are anti-support for Ukraine because they think it's a zero-sum game. So any support that Ukraine get from America is money out of America's budget, is the money away from education and healthcare, is like stopping their own army getting stuff or whatever. And it's just not the case. Or pretty much all of this stuff is defunct equipment for the US that's sitting in storage and rusting, and they have to pay to dispose of. So instead of paying to A, store it, and B, then dispose it because it's not going to be used, you can literally give that for free to Ukraine. So the only cost is transporting it from the US to Ukraine. But then the claim is that actually the Europeans might pay for that. So the UK doesn't have this equipment, but wants to help Ukraine. Would probably say, okay, well, we'll pay for the transport of that. And that's us helping America give all this stuff that America doesn't need this stuff. So anyway, none of the transfers will cost anything, blah, blah, blah. Biden has stated that Ukraine has everything they asked for. That is a flat out lie. And then he goes on to say, because this is coming from both sides in America, the Republicans' issue with this is that if we are funding a war or backing them, let them win or don't do it. They need everything we can send to them, and no fixed wing aircraft, zero tanks in Ukraine, and blocking ammo is not giving them the things that they need to win. So there are certain Republicans that are saying this and certain Democrats saying this as well. This is actually bipartisan, that we should be giving them everything and we should be giving it to them now. Then he goes on to say, look, Trump is an idiot. And now with the Ukraine has been given everything they asked for, lie makes Biden a liar. Our leaders on both sides have let Ukraine down and the world sees it. Do we really want an anti-American Europe? If Ukraine falls or bleeds to death, someone will ask who allowed it. And having fields full of weapons in the US going to scrap will provide the answer. If Biden wants an entire continent to distrust us, he's doing a good job of making that happen. So this guy's obviously not a fan of Biden. You would get the same issue, as he says, with Trump as well. What you want is someone that's basically just going to say everything now. Yeah. So that's the thought of that source. Let me know what you think. Greece wants to help build Odessa. So Zelensky is visiting Greece today. Greece wants to help Ukraine build Odessa's historic urban center. Greek Prime Minister has said in a joint press conference. Thomas Tyner says Greece is a smart country. It did not sign up to the deluded peacenik and Russian fifth column pushed cluster munitions ban. She's obviously not a fan of the cluster munitions ban. Greece is not a part of it. Greece can and should provide Ukraine with its stored M26 rockets, which carry 644 cluster submunitions versus just 72 in the DPICM in the 155 mil artillery projectiles. So in fact, when you use these rockets, the M26 rockets, there are so many more submunitions that fly out, and they're just much more effective. So Zelensky says 5 outcomes for our talks with Prime Minister of Greece. Greece joined the aviation coalition. It will train our pilots and fly F-16s. Greece is also preparing a new military aid package for Ukraine. Interesting to see what that is. I propose ways for Greece to assist us in securing Ukraine's new Black Sea corridor, ensuring freedom of navigation and unhindered grain exports. Greece is a big maritime cargo nation. 3, we discussed Greece's participation in Ukraine's recovery, including the possibility of Greece taking patronage over the recovery of Odessa. There's a lot of Greek historical connections to particularly that part of the southern part of Ukraine. Following Greece's signing, part 4 of the G7 Declaration of Support of Ukraine, we agreed to proceed to bilateral talks on security guarantees. Ukraine prepares to open EU accession talks over this year, and I thank Greece for supporting us on our way to joining the EU. I'm especially grateful for the Prime Minister for today's signing of the declaration in support of Ukraine's Euro-Atlantic integration. So really important meeting there going on as we speak. Bulgaria, also part of these meetings, can supply Ukraine with about 100 units of Soviet armored vehicles. I think these are the APCs that have been talked about before. I've mentioned these several times. Transfer can begin in late September, early October, says their head of ministry, their Ministry of Defence. Now, these are old bits of kit, but those APCs are still going to be useful. Look, get them up to the border areas and get newer stuff that are being used in the border areas down to the front line, or stuff like that. It's not like these older Soviet era APCs are going to be sent to the front line straight away. There are other uses for these that can alleviate stresses within the procurement landscape. Okay, Osin Uri here says, and this is talking about Russian military provision here. As I stated, a large-scale ghost mobilization is underway in Russia. By ghost, I mean that it is kept invisible to the Russian public for domestic political reasons, but it haunts the minds of young men, especially Muslim migrants from the East, Middle East and other ethnic Russians. I've shown you video footage of illegal and legal migrants being rounded up by the Russians and put into long queues and then kind of sent away, and you're wondering where they're going. And the theory is that they are being forced mobilized. So here's a video of Mobics who were collected around Moscow during the day and were herded onto police vans and buses and then transported to a central collection point, after which they will be sent to training for a week or two and then to the front. That's a claim. Take it with a pinch of salt. But what else are they being rounded up for? This is a turning point. This is turning into some kind of third world defense of Stalingrad level of desperation. So we have seen video footage like this previously. Is that what is taking place here? Are these people going to end up on the front line? It seems a pretty plausible explanation and shows the desperation of the Russians for sure. Anyway, moving on to geopolitical stuff, because I've been talking for way too long. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky will hold a meeting with Serbian President in Athens. This is going to be hugely important. Serbia are one of these kind of weird nations, aren't quite in the EU, but are pretty much supported of Russia. They've got a lot of connections to Russia, but also kind of speaking out both sides of their mouth. So it's going, that will, I think, be an important meeting there. In fact, I think, is there another thing I had on their meeting? No, it's another image. He towers over Zelensky. It's like little and large. Right. Ukraine wants to use a new Black Sea corridor to export grain. So we know that one ship has hugged the coast going down the Black Sea. We were talking about that. People in the threads were talking about that for a long time. Why don't they do that? They've actually done that. There's been a Hong Kong flagged vessel that's been in Odessa since the beginning of the war. It's been stuck there. Has been able to now get out by hugging the coast. And it looks like they're going to do that to get cargo vessels down to the Bosphorus Straits and out of the Black Sea and into the Med. After a successful evacuation of a vessel along a new corridor on the western Black Sea coast, Ukraine is hoping to use the corridor to export grain, says Denis Marchuk, deputy head of the Agrarian Council on national TV, as according to Reuters. Now, that is really significant. Moving on to the next thing, BRICS, so that's Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. They are just about to meet in South Africa. Putin's not going to go. We've always seen Lavrov over there being danced around by traditional African dancers. So there's all this pomp and ceremony to welcome these leaders. BRICS is wanting to increase in size. This is from The Guardian. It says China is looking to build a broader coalition of developing countries to extend Beijing's influence and reinforce its efforts to compete with the US on the global stage. This is why it's really important that US is involved in the war in Ukraine, because if they don't get involved and they go down the isolationist route, you will get the BRICS hegemony take over the US hegemony. And eventually that will translate into really hitting the GDP in the US, hitting them financially, and that will hit basically the bottom line of the US economy and people's pockets. So it's all connected. If I think many people in the US probably take for granted the US's position in the world. It's all like USA were the best at everything. I remember a US student when I was at Leeds University, and he was a good mate of mine. But we had some argument about like the US, and he got really angry and he stood up to me and he totally seriously. And he was kind of quite enlightened in the sense that he was at uni, he'd come for a year in Leeds and whatever. And he stared me in the face and he said, "The US are the best at everything in the world." And he shouted that. And I just sat there and like, wow. Like, you genuinely believe that US is the best at literally everything in the world, to the point that you would scream that in my face. Now, I'm not saying that, it's just an anecdote, right? But the point is that there will be a feeling within certain people in the US that we are the best, right? But I take that for granted, and we're the best just because we're the best, not because actually politically we're working bloody hard to keep on top of everything, around the world. There's a strategy that has been in place for 100 years plus, where we are looking at maintaining a US based hegemony. That allows you to be really good at a bunch of stuff, right? But if you're going to go isolationist, then that will have a negative effect on you being the best at everything in the world, right? Or at least thinking you are, or so on and so forth. If you allow BRICS to gain in prominence and power, that will affect the US standing, and it's just something to be really, really wary about. Now, the article goes on: the traditional global governing system has become dysfunctional, is a quote here, deficient and missing in action, the Chinese ambassador to South Africa has said at a briefing in Pretoria, adding that BRICS grouping was increasingly becoming a staunch force in defending international justice. I mean, that's bonkers, right? But both China's expansion plans and the more explicitly political stance that Beijing has outlined has riled India, the most populous country in the group. It's now got a bigger population than China. Professor Harsh Pant and international relations. I once was working in New Zealand in the New Zealand Qualifications Authority, just doing some work as a backpacker, and I had to send a fax to a Professor H.P. Dixit in India. That's one of the greatest fax I ever sent. Anyway, uh, uh, an international relations expert at the Observer Research Foundation, a think tank in Delhi, said India is looking to ensure that this platform doesn't just drift off into being an openly anti-Western platform, and there is a danger of that with both Russia and China having a certain agenda. India, and least of all Modi, have no interest in shaping India's foreign policy in an anti-Western direction. BRICS was conceived as a geo-economic platform, but is drifting into a geopolitical role, and India is not likely to be comfortable with that. Fascinating insight there. So BRICS is becoming more about a geopolitical hegemony as opposed to just, hey, let's get together to have some kind of trade bloc and work closer, geo-economically. Officials in South Africa say more than 40 countries have expressed interest in joining BRICS. That is, joining BRICS because they don't see their place in the world and the US hegemony isn't benefiting them, so they see. So they're looking for an alternative. That's something for the US to be aware of. 23 are thought to have asked formally to be admitted. Wow. Okay, this is hugely important. Hugely important. Anil Soklal, as South Africa's ambassador at large for Asia and BRICS, said one of the reasons countries were lining up to join the group was a very polarized world that had been further polarized by the Ukraine war, and that countries were being forced to take sides. Wow. So much more to talk about in that article. Right. Breaking: the USA has advised its citizens to leave Belarus immediately. There's lots to talk about this. I won't go into too much detail, but that is showing that things aren't looking good in Belarus. Domino's Pizza has closed all its outlets, or will close all its outlets in Russia, becoming one of the first major Western fast food chains to exit the country since McDonald's and Starbucks left more than a year ago. Wow. Hungarian President Katalin Novak, so not Viktor Orban, but the president, not the prime minister, has arrived on a visit to Ukraine. The Transcarpathian Regional Military Administration has reported she's going to visit Hungarian elements within Ukraine. And I think there will be some pretty important meetings as well with the Zelensky government. Breaking, and this is really cool: Finland will completely cut off development aid to countries supporting Russia. So it's trying to make Russia put them in Coventry, if you like, as we say in UK, send them to Coventry, as in, we need to make them the pariah state, says Finland. If you're going to support Russia, we ain't going to support you. Our development money that's going to come to you to help you, make things better, to make the world a better place. You ain't going to get that if you're going to show open support for Russia. And I think that's an approach that many nations should take. Anyway, I've gone on way too long. This is one of my longest second parts. Really apologise. Thank you so much for watching. Please take care. Speak to you soon.